In this video, we're going to talk about corporate simps, right? And how long someone will be willing to be a corporate simp. Now, the thing is people need to plan ahead to build the life they actually want, right? So rather than be committed to a corporation for the rest of their life, how can they do that? They can do that through quickly climbing the corporate ladder, saving, investing, building a side hustle, whatever that would be. But sometimes people are committed to a corporate career. And as I say, you've got to use it for how it can benefit you, which would be the money, maybe some social status benefits too, and the lifestyle benefits, and then find an exit plan over time, right? So in this video, we're going to learn from someone called Business with Brian, who has about 200,000 subscribers or more here. And he worked at Target and he worked at Amazon too in corporate roles. So we're going to learn a bit about the crazy corporate environment from his experience.
Here we are. I quit.
I promised myself I would never quit anything in my life.
Actually, that was one of the best days of my life. But it took me a long time to decide that that was the right path for both me and my family. Leading up to this, there were roughly 5 lessons in life that I needed to come to terms with before I could make that final jump. My daily routine was get up early, commute to work an hour or two, plow through as many emails and meetings and documents that I could, and then commute home for another hour or two. It was literally Groundhog's Day every day. Commute. There was no red pill for me to get out. Time was slipping by, and I felt like I was literally a spectator in my own life. My only reprieve at work was to go grab myself a cup of coffee or to go use the restroom, which didn't always work in my favor.
So he started with a brief clip there, right? But just before we continue his story, I just want to point out a few details. He went through it quite quickly, right? He said commuting an hour or more towards work, to travel to work and coming back to. And this is the thing, right? Where you look at this system, it's no longer about productivity, like I say. It's not about productivity. It's not about profitability. It's about control. Because if you can do the same job at home compared to in the office, why don't they let you do that, right? Because they want to control your life and they want you to be a worker consumer. They expect you to do only 2 things in life: work, consume. The reason why is because they just see you as an economic unit, right? They don't see you as a person, they don't see you as a citizen, they see you as a consumer or a worker. That's the only 2 roles they want you to have. They don't want you to have freedom of speech, they don't want you to be a critical thinker, they don't want you to be a responsible citizen or anything like that. Your only role is to work or consume. And of course, when you're around work, you might meal prep some meals, but you're going to end up buying restaurant meals, buying some coffees and funding the local economy, because that's how they see you as just an economic unit to be working for money and spending that money. The other thing is he mentions what his daily lifestyle was. And let's go through that, because this is the lifestyle of most people in corporate jobs. Things are never handled in the most efficient way. For example, you have emails, and in emails, you're going to have many unnecessary updates, passive aggressive drama between co-workers. You're going to have things that could be handled with a quick adult conversation, but that's not going to be happening. There's going to be a lot of blame culture, people dumping work on you that should sit with them. Then you've got so many meetings that hours wasted in your life. The same way the commute is a waste in your life, there's so many hours that go by that are wasting in your life, right? You're going to have to go to meetings for several hours during the day, and then by the time you get back to the desk, you have limited time to do the work you're actually paid to do, right? Then when it comes to documentation, there's so many documents that aren't necessarily organized in the best way. They can be excessive, and then there's lots of updates and tracking around that. So a key issue there that's coming over across all those points, emails, meetings and documents, is a lack of efficiency and a lack of autonomy. And this is what happens, and it can grate on you over time when you're in a corporate role, particularly when you're more experienced than an older guy like this. Now, if we're all going to be treated like adults, you think, oh, well, an employee like this in their older age should have the autonomy, the competency, they should be able to be trusted as an adult to work from home and not just skive off and pretend to be working. So this is the reality for many people in these type of corporate jobs. And the other thing is around the coping mechanisms. What are the coping mechanisms that people use to get through work? It could be coffee to get through the day. People need a stimulus. And the thing is, what I've noticed for many younger people, it's not coffee that they're drinking, it'll be energy drinks, right? And some of these energy drinks aren't the best for their heart because you have excessive amounts of caffeine. So people are using excessive amounts of coffee and caffeine to get through the day, right? Which is, again, a coping mechanism that's going to burn them out in the long term through negative health impacts. And I think just to explain my perspective, right? My perspective is that you can use the corporate world to maximize how it can benefit you. And something I cover throughout my coaching program is understanding that corporate success is, you don't want to be a well-paid slave, right? Sometimes people compare modern office work to slavery in a sense, right? You're in a glass cage, you have the trappings of social status, maybe an expensive tailored suit, and you have a fancy job title that maybe your friends are envious of, but you're not really happy, right? You want to work to milk the system, you want to work to stack cash, you want to build your future essentially, right? Build power, pay, and freedom, and break the corporate chains off your neck, right? Off the shackles off your wrists, right? And the whole strategy I use through career coaching is to turn yourself from a corporate stooge, right, into a man who has options, leverage, and zero loyalty to the broken game, the broken social contract in the corporate world, right? So there's a link in the description if you want to start working with me, and I'll really help you start playing to win rather than just surviving. So let's listen to the next clip here.
I had graduated from college in 2004, and I began my career with a company called Albertsons. This was just before the Great Recession, and I got to observe constant layoffs. And then the company was sold, and we had to re-interview for our own jobs. Even after that, layoffs were common for several years after that. So it was no surprise that moving on to another company was an easy choice for me to make. So from there, I went on to go work for Target Corporate, which was a heck of a lot more fun and a heck of a lot more stable. But even Target has a bit of a dark side. Come to Target as a middle manager from another company, I was referred to as an external. And quite honestly, anyone coming to Target from an outside company is labeled or branded as an external. Regardless of my performance, I was always going to be labeled as an external at Target. Now, I absolutely loved the people that I had worked with, but the bureaucracy and the subjective biases led me to believe that I was never going to be fully accepted at Target, which is funny because Target hangs its hat on being inclusive, which I can attest simply wasn't true for me. All of these.
So before we continue, let's talk about his experience at Target, right? In a sense, he had a life with no stability, which is kind of common for people now. That's why people can't plan ahead to build a life for themselves, a family, buying a property and getting a mortgage and having a monthly mortgage payment, because you're never sure if you're going to be dealing with a layoff in a few years from now, right? There's a life with no stability that's more common now than it was even in his generation, right? People need to cope. That's why there is so much talk about coping mechanisms, coffee and alcohol and Netflix and chill and Netflix and food delivery services, Grubhub, Uber Eats, whatever it would be. There's so much focus on that than actually people living a life. People have to live their life for short-term gratification rather than long-term fulfillment, right? Because of these difficult financial circumstances. The other thing here is mentioning he was interviewing for his own job, and just to explain how this works is you'll be working for a corporation, they want to make job cuts. This actually, I covered this recently at some other banks, I believe it was HSBC in a previous video, whereby they're going to make job cuts, right? And what they want to do is interview you and see if you're still fit for your position, which is a bit of an insult, is they're deciding whether they should keep you or lay you off. They're going to test all your competency skills through a second interview after you've been working there for years before they determine who to lay off. And this is common when you have a merger or an acquisition or private equity investment. They essentially want to cut jobs and cut costs as much as possible, and then you're in a position where you have to interview for your own job, which is a bit ridiculous. Now, this is the irony he's mentioning here, right? Where they talk about being inclusive, right? They want to be inclusive. They want to treat people fairly. They want to include everyone. But then all of a sudden there's a label on you, right? You're an external, you're a different, there's a more tribalism in the workplace than they want to pretend there is. They talk about DEI and gender equality and racial equality, but often there is cliquish type of nature thing where there's lots of cliques and you might not be in that inner circle, right? Which happens at every corporation. Now, through no fault of your own, right? If you're an external hire for a company or you just don't fit in socially, it's not your fault. You're actually applying your work ethic and doing your job, but you're being artificially held down and you can't progress. And this is the difficulty over the long term. There's only so much you can do to progress your life situation. Now, in the education system before you entered the workforce through high school, college, university, you could progress as much as you want through your skill set, right? You could just really study hard and effectively be able to live a good life, because you'd be able to get good grades and you'd be able to have the fulfillment of, if I put in effort, I can get top grades. But when you're in the workplace, you can work really hard and still get an average performance review because your manager doesn't like you and they might want to get rid of you. So these are the type of things that can really impact you over the long term. Over the short term, you can be like, you want to job hop a bit, that doesn't bother me, one bad performance review doesn't bother me. But then if you keep having negative experiences, then it's really going to start bothering you and impacting your ability to progress in your life, which is a big issue.
These experiences then led me to Amazon, where they only hire the best, which is exactly where I wanted to go to because, well, I wanted to prove that I was the best. Amazon gave me an incredible compensation package for which I am extremely thankful for. But the majority of that compensation is given in the form of RSUs, or stock that is fully awarded over a multi-year term. And this is referred to as the golden handcuffs. If you want the treasure at the end of the rainbow, then you need to survive the next 4 years. In most jobs, you put in your 40 hours a week and you turn off your responsibility the moment that you go home. And you live a relatively balanced life. Having been in corporate positions all of my career, I was used to working 50 to 60 hours a week, and that was relatively common. And for the most part, I was okay with that. The environment was relatively stable, but even then,
just to pause it, we're going to continue with this story in a moment, right? He mentioned what he just described here was working at Amazon. Now, talking about Amazon only hire the best. Now, this is a major mistake in everyone's corporate career where they try to be the best, right? The management choose who's the best by constructing a narrative around their favorite employees, right? The best option for you to pursue is to be a B+ player, right? See if they give you a promotion after 2 to 3 years at a company. If not, it's worthwhile job hopping, right? The best case scenario is you're at a job, you get on really well with your manager and your co-workers, and they really like you, because being politically favored in the corporate environment is highly valuable to your job stability and your ability to quickly progress. So I'd advise you, if you're highly liked at your company, don't job hop, right? Don't switch to another job for like 10% pay rise just because they're going to pay you a bit more, because that you could be in a new place, you get a short-term pay rise, but they might not like you, and then over time slow your progress. But if you're in a company where you're well liked, it's best just to stick there. I would advise you don't focus on burning yourself out just to prove yourself to co-workers. Focus on your balanced life of success, right? Health, wealth, freedom, relationships, if you have them. You need to take from the corporate life rather than actually focused on winning the corporate game. It's better to see your job in the corporate job as extracting wealth, extracting time, extracting resources, right? So you can live life on your basis rather than thinking, oh, how can I win the corporate game and climb the corporate ladder as quick as possible? Of course, it's circumstantial dependent, right? You don't want to be in a position where you can quickly climb the corporate ladder, but you're putting that off. But it's worthwhile thinking, I'm not trying to win the corporate game necessarily. There's a famous phrase out there. I actually had a t-shirt with it from a streetwear clothing line before. It said, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. Even if you win the rat race, you are still a rat. That means you got to think about, you're constantly chasing like a hamster on a wheel, like a rat in a maze. Are you going to really win the game, or are you really going to sacrifice who you are as a person over the long term? Now, he mentioned here with Amazon giving deferred stock, and this is how it works sometimes, whereby they want you to work there for many years before you can reap the financial benefits through having stock options and things like that. Now, he's mentioning working 50 to 60 hours. I work 60 to 70 hours, so it looks like he's doing rookie numbers. But the point is that some of these corporate jobs are going to take over your life. They're going to require so many hours of your life, and there's a limited time frame you can do that. There's only a handful of people who make great sacrifices in their personal life to do that over the long term. They might sacrifice the quality of their marriage, their time with their kids. They might sacrifice their ability and options in terms of even their health and spending time there because they're so focused on their corporate job. And another thing to apply here is how much of the time he's spending at work is actually busy work and real work, right? Is he sitting around wasting time in an inefficient way, which many people seem to be doing in a lot of these top corporate roles, allegedly, right? Next up, we're going to listen to the fear tactics that are typically used in the corporate environment to control you.
But even then, there are always these concerns of layoffs or the company being sold or simply the unknown. Always a hint of fear, but not overwhelming. But that all changed when I went to Amazon. My first week on the job, and one of my direct reports had quit. And then I had taken on all of their workload until I could get a new person hired, which took nearly a year to fill. That means that I was doing both my job and another person's job for my first year at Amazon. Amazon is tough enough, but when you have to do 2 jobs at once, it's not sustainable. This was a pretty clear indication of what my time at Amazon was going to be like. For context, the average tenure when I started was only 10 months. That means some people were only working a week and quitting, and then the others were maybe lasting until 15 months and then quitting. Within my 4 years of being there, I was on my 7th manager. And quite honestly, only 2 of them were good. Amazon is a transitory workforce by choice because they turn and burn employees. It is extremely difficult when you first come to Amazon because if you were hired, you were probably the best at the company that you would come from. Well, guess what? When Amazon only hires the best, suddenly you realize that you're just average. Everyone is competing to be the best and outdo their colleagues. You try to one-up one another by working more hours, writing more documents, or just getting more results. In reality, it is just a race to the bottom. Teams become political and they try to set up other groups to fail just in order to make themselves look better. Even managers are willing to lie and make things up just to cover their own mistakes because they too operate in fear. As if things weren't competitive enough, the managers must force rank their employees to showcase the bottom 10% that need to be on a pivot plan. Or in layman's terms, they need to make life so miserable that they quit. It doesn't matter if they're doing a good job or not. They are the bottom 10%. And it's a list you don't want to be on. The fear is the only true motivation at Amazon. I made some fantastic friends while I was there, but generally, everyone is competing against one another. I often hear from friends from other companies that quit their jobs and they refer to the people as being cogs in the machine. That doesn't even begin to describe it at Amazon. People at Amazon are more like napkins. They are disposable goods that are thrown away on a whim. They might be replaced, but more than likely they're not. When it was all said and done, I had a career at Amazon for over 5 years. And I call it a career because quite honestly, anyone that can survive Amazon longer than 4 years deserves to call it a career.
Now, before we continue with his stories and his anecdotes, right, so it's kind of surprising he's being this open about Amazon. I thought when I describe my experience at different companies, I don't name them. I'm just generically talking about the finance industry. So I'm surprised he's allowed to be this critical of a company without there being legal action against him. But firstly, I want to talk about layoff rumors. Often there are layoff rumors, job cut rumors, talks about restructuring, changing the team, the department, and this constant fear of instability. You want at least a stable role for 2 to 3 years, but you can't even get that in this fast-moving economy and rapidly collapsing society. There's so many hiccups that can come up that are nothing to do with you. The company being sold, a merger, private equity being an investor in a company, and then all of a sudden there's job cuts because of that. And then the thing is one difficult thing he mentioned about high turnover. I remember working at an American investment bank whereby there were a few instances of this, but there was one team member that had to take some time off for their health, and they didn't hire another worker to cover their work. Effectively, me and my manager at the time had to cover all the work of this employee we didn't have for a year or two, essentially. And that was very difficult. And my manager at that time had taken on a bulk of extra work because she was more experienced at that time. And it was difficult for her, right? She has her own kids to take care of. She had to dedicate all this time to this job that she wasn't getting anything extra out of. She wasn't getting paid much more for. And the thing is, if your manager's not good, in that case, her manager wasn't good. Our manager at the time, our senior manager, should have hired a contract worker to cover for this employee who was off sick for like 2 years, right? So what you should do, right, is essentially you understand those dynamics. If things are going badly, that your manager won't get blamed. They'll say you need to manage your manager, which means you need to have a better relationship with your manager. A lot of companies, they churn and burn employees. That's very true. I remember some top companies and top teams, and I was thinking, why are employees leaving these teams so quickly, so often, right? Every year would have a team of, let's just say, 15 people. Every year 5 people would leave, and it wasn't a layoff. It was just they were getting fed up of working so hard and not getting promoted, and had moved to lower quality companies. And I was thinking, what's going on? Why would you move from a massive brand name American investment bank and take a step down to a much smaller bank or another brokerage or another type of finance company? And it was because they wanted, or an exchange, for example, because they wanted to actually make more money and get promoted, but that wasn't happening. So they just moved to either an easier role or a smaller company that would promote them and pay more, right? The other thing is the competitive environment, backstabbing, people being cutthroat. There's a race to the bottom, right, rather than a race to the top, in a sense that it's like who can be more psychopathic and take more advantage than others. Now, in all mega corporations also, they want to rank employees, right? There's always going to be someone at the bottom. So it's very tough because sometimes you have a good team, right, and everyone's doing a good job, but you have to put some people and rank them at the bottom. And typically the employees getting ranked at the bottom In some cases, it's due to their performance, but some cases it's just who's the least popular person, who has the most popular gossip around them about being a good person and a nice person and a popular person in the office, and whoever has the least popular narrative traveling around them in the office, they're going to get ranked as the least effective employee, right? So it's the same in the finance industry too, right? That's why you can't be loyal to these companies. They'll just make up whatever narrative depending on whether it benefits them or not. Let's learn about how he talks about working at Amazon a bit more here.
As a manager, I had interviewed hundreds of people. And for years, I had lied to those interviewees. Almost every single one of them would ask me, what is it like to work at Amazon? And of course, I would give them some fake upbeat response, such as, the work is very rewarding, but of course, it's very challenging. Blah. After being away from Amazon for the past 2 years, I think that I can now answer that question truthfully. Imagine for a moment that you're swimming underwater and you have this goal that you want to swim to the deepest part of the pool. You put all your effort to reach the bottom, but you are far too buoyant, so you begin to release all the oxygen from your lungs. You give it all your energy, you're close, but you just can't reach it. And then you realize you need to get back to the surface for air. And since you're not on the bottom, you can't push off. You look up and you see the surface, and suddenly it feels like it's about 100 feet away. You are now swimming with all your energy just to survive. Your muscles begin to burn. Your heart is pounding in both your lungs and your throat. All the while, your lungs are screaming to get air. And then your mind begins to race, and you begin to question if you can even make it. Milliseconds begin to feel like an eternity, and your vision begins to slowly close in. Now stop. Imagine forever being in that moment. And now you know what it feels like to work at Amazon.
So he just described working at Amazon feeling like you're suffocating to death, which is kind of crazy, right? This is what it feels like after decades in the corporate world if you don't have an exit plan, right? Don't get comfortable, don't get complacent, and don't end up with the trap guy with the right double M, which I mentioned double M a few times. There's different acronyms I use for it. It could be don't end up in a miserable marriage with a massive mortgage in middle management, right? And that's what he was stuck in. Probably wasn't senior middle management, but that's probably what it was. He had to stay in there because had to keep the wife happy life, and then also he has to buy this big house that he doesn't necessarily need just for social status, and keep that middle management role again for social status, right? And not thinking about the exit plan. Let's go through some of the phrases they use to lie to you in corporate worlds, right? So he talks about when he's interviewing people, he would say the work is rewarding. That normally means that they want you to find emotional satisfaction in work that is underpaid or overworked. The work is challenging, typically means there's poor processes, unclear expectations, inefficient kind of issues that you have to deal with. Well, family really means they blur boundaries in terms of your time. They want unpaid overtime. Emotional manipulation is used to keep you loyal. They say there's many growth opportunities, which means you get extra work, which is outside the remit of your job description to do without promotion or pay rise. We have a great culture, which also means a lot of forced socialization, spending time gossiping with coworkers about their personal life after work. We value work-life balance. In practice, you'll end up contacting you outside of work hours with emails they want you to respond to quickly. Then they say they have a results-driven environment, right? Which is a lot of unrealistic targets and no concern for how much stress that actually causes you. They also talk about empowering employees. That usually means you're left alone without guidance, but you still get blamed when things do go wrong. They talk about going through an exciting transition, which often means layoffs, chaos, management without any clear plan. They talk about encouraging innovation, which means you'll have to pitch ideas to management, which they'll ignore or they'll take credit for, and you won't get any bonus or special treatment because of that. Let's continue to listen to his story here.
My career, I had to deal with rounds of layoffs, being acquired by another company, having to re-interview for your job, feeling like an outcast and being labeled as an external despite having incredible results, and literally being treated like a disposable object where the company constantly squeezes you for more. But hey, according to this boomer, the problem with society is that employees are no longer loyal. Seriously. Just before I made the decision to quit, I took a very long, hard look at what brought me to this point. When I first began my career, I had this personal brand that I was this lighthearted, easygoing kind of guy that would do anything I could to get the job done and help anyone along the way. But my personal brand at Amazon was this impatient person that disrespected anybody that wasted my time. I had my goals to accomplish and don't get in my way. That was me, just like every other hardened Amazonian that's been there more than 4 years. But how did I get to this point? It didn't exactly happen overnight. The reason is simple. It's the analogy of how you boil a frog. If you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it jumps out to save its life. It knows it's in danger. But if you put a frog in tepid water and slowly increase the temperature, the frog doesn't realize the impending doom and it gets cooked to death. In a matter of speaking, this is what had happened to me and how I had changed over time. And I'm guessing there are a lot of you out there that can probably relate to this. In my career, each year, I would make the smallest of changes to myself to adhere to the corporate principles and the expectations placed on me based on my performance review. The temperature of my pot of water was slowly going up each year. But suddenly, one day you wake up and you've missed your 2-year-old daughter's birthday because you had to fly to some random city to have a forgettable meeting with a bunch of forgettable suppliers. For some reason, the needs of the company outweighed everything that was important in my life. My pot of water was about to boil, and I needed to make some changes. There was no balance in my life. Speaking of balance, I was in a meeting with Jeff Bezos. Yes, that Jeff Bezos. And he made the comment, literally verbatim, that there is no such thing as work-life balance. Seriously, what the hell, Sinky Finland? Is no...
Now, before we go through the final clip from this boomer, the bald-headed boomer, what we're going to do is actually think through what he just said here. He talked about dealing with a lot of volatility, which he went through, layoffs, re-interviewing for his jobs, going through an acquisition, seeing himself as disposable, even at top corporations that say they treat you well, and you'd have some job stability there, which you don't. Now, this is the new normal for most employees, right? He might have had a particularly tumultuous, unstable career compared to maybe others in his generation, but for many people in Gen Z, millennials, and even slightly older would have to deal with this as just normal reality. And one important thing he mentions there, which isn't about money or time, which are typically two things you need to talk about when it comes to corporate jobs, is about changing your personality, becoming more impatient, aggressive, psychopathic, right? And what these corporations do with employees, the same way these governments are doing with society, boiling frogs is the metaphor that's used. Is where you had take a frog, put it in water in a saucepan in a cooking pot, and then you slowly turn up the temperature. So the frog is alive. It doesn't notice that the temperature is getting hotter and hotter until it is boiled alive, right? And this is what it's like for many people. You're in society, you're working, trying to survive, then they're quickly turning up the heat with inflation, cost of living, social dysfunction, racial or religious or gender tensions, right? The culture war, things like that. You're at a corporation, you're trying to do a good job, and they turn up the tension with higher performance requirements until you get pushed out and deal with a layoff. That's how the system's really trying to screw you over. Now, it's important to set boundaries there, and I know it's tough, but it's like setting boundaries between your identity at work and outside of work. And that's a very difficult thing to do because you have to do this thing called masking. It's where you put on a mask to be professional and tactful, of course, but also to be someone you're not necessarily in the corporate environment to survive, when in your real world you might be quite a nice person, but at work you have to be really cutthroat. Now, he's talking about going to a meeting when he's at Amazon with Jeff Bezos himself. Now, billionaires like Jeff Bezos, they can talk about no work-life balance, because if you're making billions of dollars, you want to be fully engrossed in your work, and your social life revolves around work. Typically, these multimillionaires or billionaires who are at work, right, they don't need free time because, firstly, unlike normal people in normal jobs and normal salaries, you have to spend some of your free time doing your chores, your meal prepping, cleaning your apartment or wherever you live, spending some time with family and things like that, and doing your general day-to-day maintenance, right? But if you're a multimillionaire or a billionaire, all of that you've paid for a cleaner, you paid for a chef, you paid for a meal prep company, you paid for a chauffeur or driver to take you different places. But in day-to-day life, right, a lot of these very wealthy people, they don't take into account the grind of the commute of getting on a train for an hour back and forth to the office, right? The other thing is people don't understand about how billionaires, right, they spend all their time around work, and none of it actually feels like work, because a lot of it is just meetings, chit-chatting about what the work is, and then delegating the actual work to more junior employees. So they're never really stressed. And then you have these billionaires who also have their evenings with client dinners. They're hanging out with their clients, right? Or their major vendors, their major business relationships. So they spend all their time working. They don't have work-life balance, but they're enjoying every moment of their life because there's no real stress, right? Jeff Bezos doesn't have the daily stress of financial pressure, of thinking about financial freedom, because he's already a billionaire. You're probably working for your deep state and things like that, pretending to be a successful genius. So this is the type of reality you have to deal with.
career where I came to recognize there were 5 lessons in my life that I needed to address. My first lesson was I have nothing more to prove to myself or anyone else. And the second lesson was no matter what anyone else tells you, the company will not be loyal to you. It is your responsibility to take care of you. And the third lesson is if fear is your main motivation, which I dare say most Amazonians fall in that, then it's time to move on. The fourth lesson, over time, if you continue to make small tweaks and changes to yourself just to adhere to a company's leadership principles or what they expect from you in a performance review, then you begin to lose sight of your priorities in life and who you really are. And the fifth and final lesson, for which I can't stress enough, you need to be present to win. With all that in mind, I chose to retire in my 40s. We sold our house in Seattle and we moved in the Midwest to be near my wife's family.
So there's 5 key points he mentioned there. Firstly, having nothing else to prove, right? Now, I made it to director level. I'm working at some of these top companies, which I mentioned before, which is here. Right there, right? So I've worked at some of these top companies, making it to director level, and I had nothing to prove after a point, right? Normally, people want to be in this never-ending competition with their co-workers to have a higher job title than them and more salary and competing with their friends and their family, whatever it would be. I realized I have nothing to prove to these people, right? I can continue with this. Do I want to continue and be in a position where I make it to managing director? I have my own corner office, and then I have, due to all these equality requirements, you have to have all these DEI messaging on your office door, as anyone who's in management would have to do this. They'd have a big rainbow flag, and it's just like I don't really represent that side. You get what I mean? So I don't really want to be having that kind of flag. If that's what you got to do, if you got to pretend to support various leftist agendas just to succeed in the corporate world, do I actually want to do that, or do I want to focus on an exit plan? The second thing he's talking about is how companies are not loyal to you, right, as an individual, right? So why should you be loyal to a company if a company's not loyal to you? They're essentially exploiting you. They're underpaying you, of course, because in order to make a profit, they have to underpay their employees. The third thing is not working in fear. And I agree with him, right? In the short term, if you want to develop your skills, if you're at the start of your career, you might work at a major corporation whereby they do use fear to control you, and you develop your skills. You have the brand name company on your resume, so you can do what you want after that, right? But can you live your life like that on a long-term basis? In many cases, not. In many cases, you can be job hopping, looking for an exit plan, but then how long can you sustain that? Could you do that? You could do that for maybe 3 years at one company, job hop to another for 3 years, job hop another 2 or 3 years, then a decade goes by, maybe do that 5 years at another company, 5 years at another, that's 20 years gone. And then can you do that until you're in your 50s, until you look like this guy? Daily stress, does it not take a toll on you? This is what the corporate world does to break you down. And the other thing is about you changing yourself, which is the fourth point he mentioned, right? Do you like the way management conduct themselves? Do you want to conduct yourself like that over the long term? Will that compromise with your personality? You got to really think these things through, because that takes a toll on you too, apart from the time and effort you're putting into the work. It's the masking, the putting on a fake character that can weigh you down. And then point number 5 is about being present, right? And being present in your life. If you want to spend more time in your relationship with your kids, retire in your 40s, he came to the conclusion, which comes back to my career coaching, right? Is that what matters in life is power, pay, and freedom. And that's what really matters. Not a job title, not just a salary, but the absolute freedom, financial freedom, time freedom to live your life on your terms. And that's what it all comes down to. So we listened to an example. This is a guy who worked in senior corporate roles at Target, at Amazon. A lot of the experience he's saying directly was at Amazon. So this is the reality, the corporate world that you're getting from me and from some of the examples I bring up on my channel. So if you're interested actually in career coaching and pushing forward with greater freedom for yourself, so you have a long-term plan that actually works for your lifestyle, let me know. There's a link in the description to work with me directly. Let me know in the comments how you feel about this guy's story at working at Amazon. 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and I'll see you next time.